To close the self or not to close the self? That is the question. Welcome to Strip Cover Alert, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we are here for another poetry discussion, which will take place in two different playlists here on the channel. Number one being the poetry discussion playlist, and number two being the Emily Dickinson playlist, a playlist of videos exclusively about the greatest poet of all time, Emily Dickinson. The poem in question today: He put the belt around my life, and it reads as such. He put the belt around my life. I heard the buckle snap and turned away imperial, my life folding up deliberate, as a duke would do, a kingdom's title deed, henceforth and dedicated sort, a member of the cloud, yet not too far to come at call, and do the little toils that make the circuit of the rest, and deal occasional smiles to lives that stoop to notice mine, and kindly ask it in, whose invitation knew you not, for whom I must decline. I think, so this poem seems to be about entering a relationship that would then close the self down to the greater world. Maybe not. Maybe it is some other type of relation, some type of occupation, some type of calling, whatever that might be. But turning the self into something like a monk, complete in dedication towards a thing, a person, an act, a discipline, something of the sort. But I don't think we really necessarily have to go as specific as that. I think that when talking about this poem in greater context, the couple statements that really stick out are this one: he put a belt around my life, and then whose invitation knew you not, for whom I must decline. These are the big questions presented in this poem, in my estimation, and what we have to do in this poem is decide what this means to ourselves. Is there something? So what are we saying here? He put the belt around my life. Now, to put a belt around something is to complete it, to compact it, to assume that thing is whole and set the way it is. You put the belt on your pants, that's holding you for the rest of the day. You are hoping not to grow too much or shrink too much in that day, but you put a belt around a stack of papers, you put a belt around all sorts of things to keep it compact, to assume said thing whole, to assume my life whole. At some point, do we make this decision in life? At some point, do we make this decision for aspects of life? In your workday, do you do this? Do you at some point put a buckle around the work that was done that day? Do you at some point in life put a buckle around the assumed amount of work you will do in your life? Do you have self-limiting beliefs in this way? So self-limiting beliefs is often given a rather negative tone to self-limit, but I don't think that tonality has to be all that negative. I think that if you were to become completely dedicated to a thing, that would be putting a buckle around your life. Later in the poem, the question is, to lives that stoop to notice mine, and kindly ask it in, whose invitation knew you not, for whom I must decline. If you are to do this thing where you limit the self, where you encapsulate the self into one thing, what do you deny? I think that on the greater life scale, you have to do this to some extent. You have to limit the self to certain things. An easy example of this are athletes, the ones who become the greats, the Kobe Bryants of the world, the Tom Bradys of the world, the Michael Jordan. Well, Michael Jordan might not be such a great example. There was a little more indulgence in his life than for Kobe Bryant, than for as Tom Brady became, right? TB12, that whole thing where he was not eating anything except those strict parameters that he had set on himself, etc. These are examples, easy to spot examples, of people who have closed the self to some great degree. You make this decision every day of your life to limit the self to some extent. At what point do you go home and retire for the evening? At what point do you go home and say, that was the work that is to be done this year? These questions for me have always been foreboding, seemingly foreboding. And one example that I give for myself oftentimes is that when all I wanted as a child, the only things I really ever wanted was a truck and to go to college. Eventually I got a small truck, but then I had to work to get myself to college. Part of what that meant for me was giving up sports in high school. I didn't have time to play football. I didn't have time to run track my senior year. I had to get to college, so I had to get a job. Getting a job greatly restricts the social life, right? That seems like a very small decision, much smaller than what seems to be talked about here, especially the act in this poem seems to be done by someone else. Someone else is limiting our speaker in this poem, putting that buckle around her life. But I think the greater observation has to come at some point in life. You will do this, or it will be done for you. You will limit yourself in those things that you do, or it will be limited for you. In the work culture that we sort of find ourselves, that limiting factor, that narrowing factor, a lot of time seems to be money. If you have a career, you will have the money maybe to pursue other things in life, but you will not have the freedoms offered to you by having a quote unquote job. In a career, you are limited by the expectations of said career. It opens up other things for you. You can spend your money on other things. Having a job allows you more time, less demand, but you also have less money to pursue those things that you would otherwise enjoy. So I think that on a life scale, what this poem is really being narrowed down to is that we have to make these decisions, or these decisions will be made for us. The speaker in this poem has the decision made for her, him or her. I don't think there's any real necessary limiting to the gender of the speaker here, but because it was written by Emily Dickinson, for the sake of ease, we will say her. The decision in this poem to be limited rather than to limit, to be the one whose life is buckled rather than buckling her own life, extends to the social domain. Is our speaker here deciding not to speak to other people, deciding to decline those invitations? Or are these invitations being declined for her? I think that is sort of the thrust of this poem, the thrust of how this poem could be applied to life in general. Limit the self, or the self will be limited. That is all I have for this poetry discussion. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel. Dropping multiple videos every single week. There is poetry to be had every Monday, and I hope to have you back for the next one.